Thank you very much. Great to be here in Athens. It's my second visit to Athens. So I've met some old friends when I've come this week. I did a workshop for 2 days earlier in the week, and I've made some new friends as well. So great to be here, and I hope to be back soon. Now, my bio is very slightly out of date. We heard that I was publishing a new book this year, my third. It is actually out. Right to Left, The Digital Leader's Guide to Lean and Agile. The reason I brought it on the stage is because I've got 2 copies to give away, and at the end of the talk, I'll explain how you can claim your prize. So, are we on? Here we go. And I'm not clicking. Here we are. Right. I'm going to start with quite a strong statement. There are 2 kinds of Agile. Do you believe me? So there's a kind of Agile that brought you to this conference, the kind of Agile that gets you excited, gets you thinking deep thoughts about the nature of work, gets you excited about the winning solutions and the fantastic working environments that you can create with Agile. So that's on one side. But there's another side, a darker side perhaps. We keep reading, it seems in the last few months, we keep reading blog posts called things like Agile is dead, or I'm done with Agile, those kind of things. Obviously the statement Agile is dead is a nonsense, but we kind of have to take the complaint seriously, and we have to take some responsibility for why things are the way they are. Now, there are some explanations. Oh, Agile has just gone mainstream. This was inevitable. It's all the fault of certifications. Those ships have sailed. We can't fix those. And I think we need a different way of framing the problem, looking at it, so we can actually be optimistic. And I remain optimistic. I don't think Agile is dead. I'm proud to be part of the Agile community. So how do we explain this? Now, there's one tool that's really good for explaining anything, and that is Lego, if my clicker's going to work. Let me stand closer to my computer. So how is Lego going to explain 2 kinds of Agile? Now, suppose you had to explain Lego. How would you do it? Would you do it... I'm going to have to stand where I can click my computer. If you had to describe Lego, where would you start? Would you start on the left with truckloads of plastic granules arriving at the Lego factory? Or would you start with children playing with the finished product? So from the left with plastic granules, from the right with children playing. Left or right? From the right. Obviously you would. Now, so let's make this a bit more relevant. If you had to describe Agile, where would you start? Would you start with backlog items in Jira? Other tracking systems are available. Or would you start with working software that is already beginning to meet needs? So backlog items in Jira, working software. From the left or from the right? Where are you going to start? From the right. Okay, makes sense. How do we normally describe Agile? I'll leave that out there. And let's think about how we describe some well-known frameworks. Let's start with Scrum. So how do we describe Scrum? 2 levels of backlog, planning events and all the rest of it, a left to right process? Or is Scrum pursuing our objectives goal by goal? So backlogs, 2 levels of planning, or pursuing our objectives goal by goal. Now, interestingly, both those descriptions are completely compatible with the Scrum Guide. The same's true also of SAFe. And I've looked at a number of the scaling frameworks, and actually SAFe is the one that makes this the most explicit, which is why I chose it. So N levels of backlog, where N is proportional to the height of your SAFe poster, or shared objectives pursued goal by goal. So which one do you prefer? Which version do you think is more likely to encourage people to collaborate, to self-organize, to innovate, to be creative, and so on? Plowing through our backlogs, or pursuing our objectives goal by goal? From the left or from the right? From the right. So This is quite an interesting way to frame how Agile works, and we'll see it has some more implications as well. I'm going to explain how we get more of the right to left version, and less of the left to right version with two what ifs. So the first what if is this one. What if done meant that someone's need was met? So a really short definition of done, arguably the only definition of done you will ever need. It's pretty easy to remember, but if you want to remind yourself or you want to share it with somebody else, print it to put it on your wall. agendashift.com/done is the way to reference it. So that's the first what if. What if everything that we did was focused on meeting someone's need? The second what if kind of follows. What if Agile meant putting the things on the right, needs met and outcomes realized, ahead of all the other stuff? Ahead of the processes, the practices, the tools, the frameworks, the solutions, all that stuff. So what if we started with focusing on what those needs were, started by articulating the outcomes we wanted to achieve, and then used all the stuff on the right to help us deliver that? And we keep looking at how well the stuff on the left is helping us do that, and so on. And we're changing from the framework as a solution to be implemented to the framework that supports ourselves in our pursuit of outcomes on behalf of our customers, users, other stakeholders whose needs we want to meet. So it's quite a different way of looking at things. So it's this from the right perspective puts everything else into proper context. And so it changes how we think about frameworks. Alistair yesterday talked about frameworks being complicated. And he's done a wonderful job of distilling Agile into 4 words. I haven't gone as far as Alistair, but what I have done is thought about, what is the essential pattern exemplified by the framework? So with Scrum, iterated self-organization around goals. We organize around a sprint goal, think about how we're going to do it. And goal by goal, we get to where we want to go. Kanban is about making flow explicit, making it visible, and so on. And just off the top of my head this morning in my hotel room, I was thinking, well, how many ways do Scrum and Kanban combine? And I could already think of 5 or 6 ways. And this is, again, we're helping putting frameworks into proper perspective. Think of frameworks as patterns, first of all, and then realize that the way they combine is often more interesting than the framework itself. This even extends to how Lean and Agile combine. It was like Scrum and Kanban both owe a lot to Lean and Agile. If Lean is the pursuit of flow, and in our kind of work, most problems of flow, most failures of flow, boil down to a failure of collaboration. And so Agile actually brings some of the tools that we need, or many of the tools that we need, to address failures of collaboration. And that's how that supports what we're trying to do with Lean. More of that with things like DevOps, XP. How do we create an environment where feedback is maximized? How we do create high feedback environments? So with the XP practices, how do we get minute-to-minute feedback on our development work? How do we then build a platform that supports that right through the process end-to-end, including bringing in feedback from the outside world that will inform our decision-making about what options we want to explore, to develop, and so on. Exploring options, so we've got things like user stories, job stories, BDD, all these different tools, very useful for exploring what we understand about our customers, their needs, and so on. So I won't go through the complete list, but you can see that each of these brings something special, each of these brings something important, and they work amazingly well together. The sum is greater than the parts. Now, if that seems a bit abstract, let's talk about something very real. I had the privilege of working for 2 government IT projects. Now, those sound very strange words. How many people would expect to hear the words government IT project and privilege in the same sentence? But actually, in the UK, the government digital space has been an amazing place to work for the last 10 years or so. And the way they've done it has been very, very clever. Government digital is governed not by prescription, not by saying you must use this tool, you must use this practice, you must use this process. It's governed by 10 principles. And the first of those principles is start with needs. User needs, not government needs. Or just in one phrase, start with user needs. And it's not just advice. If you can't demonstrate that you are set up to explore, discover real user needs, the needs of real citizens, actually talking to them, actually doing the user research, understanding all the problems that they have with the current systems, then your project, your initiative, your digital service won't even get funding. And sometime down the line, when you want to do a beta test or move into full production, or you want the next tranche of money, if you can't demonstrate that you are still committed to exploring user needs and committed to evolving your service to respond to your evolving understanding of user needs, that money won't come. This is a really powerful tool. It has fundamentally changed the way digital services are designed, built, operated in the UK. We've gone from big suppliers, big requirements documents, millions of pounds, to small teams doing Agile, Lean Startup, Scrum, Kanban, all the things that I talked about, and delivering services that people actually like. And it just seems extraordinary that governments can deliver digital services that people actually like, but it really is possible. So, back to my original contention, there are 2 kinds of Agile. The one that thinks from the left, backlog-driven, process-centric, and the one that thinks from the right, focusing on needs and outcomes, needs-based and outcome-oriented. So this is useful as a perspective. I've talked to some people, particularly larger projects in SAFE implementations, for example, where they say actually we get both perspectives in the same project. You know, we've got some people, some Agilists, very much thinking from the right side, very much thinking about user needs and goals and outcomes and needs being met and so on. And this whole initiative is plugged into a very old-fashioned program management office, PMO, and they're still worried about how long will it take to plough through our backlog. And there's this tension there. So much as I would hope that just the changes of perspective would change everything, it's actually not quite enough. And we actually need to think not only how do we explain Agile, how we think about Agile, but also how we introduce it into organizations. And there's a left to right way and a right to left way. So the left to right version first, it'll seem very familiar, painfully familiar perhaps. You prescribe a process, so you decide, we're going to do Safe and Spotify, or we're going to do Scrum, whatever it might be. It's justified. Perhaps someone thinks it's very important that we generate a sense of urgency around this. If we don't get Safe implemented soon, we're going to be in real trouble. Then it's rolled out. You get the sheep dip training, the training where everybody gets the same training right across the organisation, and now we're all doing Scrum or Safe or whatever it might be. And then you have to deal with the consequences. Well, what are the consequences? Well, you've forced process on people that they didn't necessarily want. You overcame their resistance to change, probably by ignoring it. And the end result doesn't actually work for people. The results are so disappointing, you wonder, well, why did we go through all this pain in the first place? And worse, because it's not working, we have to go through this whole process again with another framework to see if we can do any better. Now I paint a caricature, but whenever I paint this picture, I see nods around the room, and people have seen it, they've experienced it for themselves. So what does a more right to left version look like? Well, let's start by identifying needs. So what are we trying to achieve as an organization? What are the customer needs strategically that help define what we're about? What are our needs inside of the organization that we need to meet? Bigger organizational needs, the needs of the people doing the work, and so on. And can we agree, first of all, on some outcomes that we would all like to achieve? And then look for some options that will help us deliver those outcomes. And those frameworks we talked about are a rich source of options, a rich source of ideas, inspiration, and so on. So I'm certainly not dismissing them. And then we start to test some assumptions. Okay, we think if we implement this tool, this process, this practice, it will deliver some benefit. And we can test that. And then we can go back and generate some more options and test some more assumptions and see how things improve. What I've just described is, you could think of it as Scrum for organizational change or Lean Startup for organizational change. It is going about change in an agile way rather than the waterfall way of the model on the left. And the frustration for me is that left to right model, that waterfall style of change management, is actually based on the model that's older than Agile, and yet the organization development world has moved on in an incredible way since long before the year 2000. So here's our linear process. The headline says linear process meet emergent challenge. How's that going to work? That's the question. And the truth is, it doesn't work very well. We meet resistance to change very early on, and that on its own may be enough to derail the initiative. We choose a solution that doesn't actually work, so we've got to go back to the beginning and start again. It only half works. Maybe that's even worse. If it half works, we kind of live with it, but we're disappointed with the results. And now we've got to find another solution. So we do this again and again and again, and people just get tired of it. Change fatigue sets in. So as I said, this is based on an understanding of organization development that is very naive, very incomplete, very dated. A modern organization development looks much like this. It's a marriage of two perspectives, really. This isn't good and bad. These are two complementary things, and you generally need some of both. So the more well understood kind of organization development goes by the name of diagnostic organization development. So in diagnostic organization development, you understand your organization often through some kind of metaphor. So a machine, an organism, an ecosystem, a system of autonomous agents, or people as they're sometimes called. And change is expert diagnosis and intervention. So you find a way to heal the patient, make the ecosystem more healthy, reprogram the autonomous agents, and so on. And it's quite a discrete process. You do some analysis, you try to understand what's going on, you propose an intervention, and then that intervention gets executed. When it's done well, all the steps I mentioned are done not just thoughtfully, but including as many people as possible in the process. It's participatory. Whole system consulting is one, or whole system change management is one name that sometimes gets given to it. Dialogic OD, you'll like this in Greece. So dialogic OD doesn't start with metaphor, it starts with philosophy. So the idea is an organization is socially constructed, creating meaning through its discourse. Without people talking to each other, the organization would not exist. The organization develops through its conversations. The conversations between people in the organization, the conversations between people inside the organization and outside of it. Nobody can control all of that. But you can influence it. And you influence it in two ways. The first is to have some new conversations. Let's talk about some new outcomes. Let's talk about some new needs, for example. But also new kinds of conversations. What if we got good at having that kind of conversation? What if we got good about having conversations about needs, conversations about outcomes, and so on? And we're going to experience what some of that is like. It's easier to experience than it is to explain. I'm just picking up my phone so we'll keep track of the time. So I'm going to use a technical term, or two technical terms. So the technical term is generative image. And that's an organization development term. A generative image is something that paints a picture in your mind. Different people will respond to it in different ways, but your different responses will be kind of coherent with each other. The classic example of a generative image is the phrase sustainable development. Now that came up in a UN study, and that study didn't actually define what the term sustainable development actually meant. So when you're talking about sustainable development in an environmental sense, or sustainable development in an agile development sense, it means two different things, but the phrase is kind of useful. And when you focus on one domain or another, different people's responses will tend to be coherent, and that's useful, and you can do something with that. So the other technical term is true north, or North Star. These are used in different ways, but they are medium-term, long-term, or indefinitely far objectives that we can align towards, move towards. And this is of the indefinitely far kind. I'm describing something that we'll probably never actually reach, but it's great fun trying. So let's read this out. Imagine everyone able to work consistently at their best. Individuals, teams, across the organization and beyond. Right people, right conversations, best possible moment. Needs anticipated, met at just the right time. Now you're each going to respond to that in different ways. Different parts of that will resonate with you in different ways. What I'm going to ask you to do now is have a conversation with your neighbour. So let's make this dialogic, let's make this conversational, let's have some discourse. So a question for your neighbour, very simple one. What's that like? It's a bit like Agile. Alistair said yesterday, noticing. Perhaps you notice that you have some of this and you'd like more of this. Perhaps you realise that you're a long way away from this, but just enjoy for a moment what it would be like if we had this all the time, day by day, moment by moment. So I'll give you a minute just to have a conversation with your neighbour. What's that like? Okay? I'll do the hand thing, see if it works. Well, it does work if you point it out at least. Right, so another question for you. So with your neighbour, thinking about the things you've just discussed, all those good things that you talked about, what obstacles are in the way? I'll give you a minute to talk about that. What obstacles are in the way? I'm doing the hand thing again, just to point it out. Right, we could talk about obstacles all day, couldn't we? Talking about obstacles is fun, but it doesn't actually get us very far. So another question for you. Some of you will recognize this question. It's a very coachy question. Is what would you like to have happen? Relative to that obstacle, what would you like to have happen? Okay, give you a minute to discuss that. Here we go. Thank you. One more question. Then what happens? Another minute to discuss then what happens. We'll stop it there. So you heard Alistair and Soledad yesterday talking about future focus or solutions focus. So they are close cousins of a body of knowledge that. Well, I reference that. I reference both. Well, I reference solutions focus in Agenda Shift. I reference also clean language, which is what you experienced just now. So asking questions that, to quote Andrea, are full of curiosity, respect, and non-judgment. The questions actually don't allow the questioner to impose their assumptions on the conversation. You're asking questions to which you don't know the answer. And good questions are ones to which you don't know the answer because you're going to learn something. Okay? So I've taken just a small selection of the clean language questions and turned that into a coaching game called 15-Minute Photo. It's open source, you can download it. There's a video you can watch to see how it's facilitated. It's a bit more elaborate than the version we can do at a conference. But what it actually gives people the opportunity to do is experience what it's like to be on either side, both sides of a coaching conversation. You can see we've got 3 participants playing the game here, and Rahul and Ruta here at the front are in a very intense conversation. Amy behind is taking notes. And they're experiencing a coaching conversation of a kind that perhaps they've never had before. I call this a coaching conversation, but it's not just for coaches. This is for leaders. This is for anybody in the organization who wants to help identify outcomes around which people can self-organize, innovate, be creative, and so on. I use it mainly in the change space, but there are people doing it in business analysis, in user research, and so on. So it's actually quite a difficult exercise to try for the first time, because you're teaching yourself not to impose your assumptions. You're teaching yourself to ask better questions to which you don't know the answers, to change some very deep habits. But the more you practice it, the better you get at asking better questions. And bringing this into organizations is a way of changing the kinds of conversations that organizations have. So just to perhaps just step back to a little bit of theory on that. So what's our alternative to that horrible linear process that we saw? So we start with that generative image that I talked about, that in this case the true north. We have others that we use. And we bring it home somehow. Ask you a question that kind of brings it to the present. So what's happening when this is working at its best for you is an example. What's that like is a simpler question. The noticing thing from Alistair yesterday I thought was wonderful as well. Then what obstacles are in the way? We don't do a deep dive on obstacles. That's not actually very productive. We're not fixing machines. There's no one root cause to identify. It's actually much more productive to find an outcome that we can all agree on and go after. So what would you like to have happen? Generates a layer of outcomes. Then what happens? Generates another layer. Other questions we can ask. What kind of? What's happening? Where does that come from? And so on. And we are going from obstacle space into outcome space and actually modeling a whole landscape of them. And before you know, you've got a wall full of stickies that you can organize, various mapping tools that we use makes different kinds of sense out of the detail that we've generated. In just a few minutes, we can easily generate 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 stickies. We can prioritize them just in time. We're being lean, remember. And we just remember that we always must have options. Those outcomes that were generated, there'll come a point when that true north that we are aiming for looks too far away. We don't have enough options that will take us far enough in the right direction. And we'll go through the process again. We'll generate some more options, test some more assumptions, and that's how the organization changes. So, just to wrap up, what if Agile, and with it Agile adoption, if that's even a good word, I'm not sure that it is, meant putting the things on the right ahead of the things on the left? What if we focused on needs and outcomes and put all the other stuff, the processes, the frameworks, the tools, the solutions, everything that we do day to day, to the service of needs and outcomes, put all the stuff into its proper perspective, stop making the stuff the solution that we're trying to implement or to force on people. So that's a different change in perspective. I am just about done. I hope that at least someone's need was met. I hope I met your need. Just to finish, I did mention I'm giving a couple of books away. I'm with some colleagues in our Slack group. We're collaborating on something called Wholehearted. It's not finished yet, but I invite you to look at agendashift.com/wholehearted. And if you tweet to the conference hashtag, AGRS 2019, and tag either AskBlake, which is my Twitter account, or Right to Left Guide, which is the book, mentioning either of those URLs, the first two notifications that hit my phone will qualify for the book, so be quick. I will leave it there. I don't know how much time we have for questions. We do have some time for questions. Fantastic.
So let's have a conversation. I'm ready to run up or not. Question down here, up there. Everyone's kind of tweeting right now, so let's give them a second. Let's give them a second. They're like, just gonna tweet. Just need a tweet. I'm not gonna ask the question until I tweet. There we go.
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Excellent talk as always. I have a question related with the linear process that you described before. As the second step in your linear process slide, you mentioned about wrong solutions.
Yes.
I would like to understand, so please elaborate a little bit more, how you combine the wrong solution with the linear process. Based on my understanding, even if there is a linear process or even there is agile process, there are always cases when the wrong solutions unfortunately are applied. So my understanding is that this is not directly related with a linear process or not. Thank you.
Okay. So we just think about what Agile has done for us. Back in the bad old days, for some of us at least, delivering software meant spending many months of work writing software against a big specification. Millions of pounds, millions of euros spent. Then we'd deploy a system to production, hand it over to our support people, and walk away. And then our very disappointed customers then have to worry about how do we get a change to this awful system, and how many more millions of pounds is it going to cost to get a system that we want. So that was waterfall. But actually this left to right style of change management I talked about, the kind I caricatured, the kind that really appalls me, applies that same kind of thinking to change projects, to implementing process. Let's spend many months, maybe even years, rolling out a new process design for the organization. Instead, what if we first of all broke that down into smaller chunks, but we don't worry about most of the chunks, we just worry about the things that we can test now, worry about whether, in the case of software delivery, whether our customers actually can use it, whether it's beginning to meet their needs or not. In the case of organization design, whether that experiment is delivering some kind of benefit to the people in the organization and to its customers. Lean, in the end, there is no such thing as the lean process, just as there's no such thing as the agile process. Lean is the pursuit of flow. It's an open-ended thing, not a closed-ended thing. It's not a design to be implemented. It's a cliche, but it's a journey. If all you remember about Lean is that it's the pursuit of flow, that's a good thing to understand about it. Just as with Agile, as Alistair, I keep calling him Agile. Alistair said yesterday, Lean, Agile as delivery, collaboration, reflection, improvement. So it's distilling these really important ideas into something that's open, has lots of options, comes in very different sizes and shapes depending on the context that it's in. But in every case, these are things that are testable. And by testing things in small chunks is how we make our organizations, our systems, our solutions, our products, our services better for everyone who participates in them.
I wonder though how many of those processes that you just described actually are compatible to the way big government projects, for example, are funded and paid for and specified. And
the UK is living proof that everything I just described can work. And if it can work for a government, it can work for anybody. Is an argument I regularly make.
Let's take a couple of more.
Yeah.
There we are. Dimitris.
Thanks, Mike, for the wonderful talk. So, what do you do with the feeling of powerlessness that comes up sometimes when the audience feels that the obstacles are beyond their control to fix?
We're very much in the space that Agile's... I've done it again. Very much in the space that Alistair talked about yesterday and me again today with this clean language stuff. You can waste a lot of energy digging into obstacles and thinking that there's no solution to it and so on. Alistair's technique yesterday, the solutions-focused technique, is to say, well, just for a moment, let's just imagine that an obstacle was completely taken away. You go to bed one night and you wake up in the morning and the obstacle's gone. How is it different? And get people thinking in that future-oriented way, which is why Alistair called it future focus. With clean language, we'll ask questions like, well, what would you like to have happen? And it just helps flip people from the obstacle space into the outcome space. The trick, if there's a trick, is to make this a participatory process. So it's actually not just one-to-one coaching conversations, but getting lots of people in a room. And now we're getting agreement on outcomes. And if for my agenda shift stuff, start with needs was principle number 1. Principle number 2 was agree on outcomes. Agreement on outcomes is the perfect platform for change. Once you've got agreement on outcomes, now what we're going to do is find a solution. And finding solutions is something that technical people like to do, just as Andrea said earlier. Thank you. I'll check my phone for Twitter.
Enjoy the rest of your day in Athens. Mike is flying out this evening. You're flying out this evening, I understand.
That's right. Very late night for me tonight.
Okay. Well, I hope you have a fantastic rest of day in Athens then.
Thank you very much.
See you soon. Thank you very much, Mike. All right, everyone.